vlog guys, I am lokiSX and today we are going to talk about something quite controversial. Now this topic, as you've probably read in the video description, is a very hit and miss kind of topic. It is widely discussed and it is used in multiple types of motorsports and car scenes in general. Whether it be for street use or dailies and commuters, whether it be for drifting, racing, circuit racing, hill climbs, gymkhana, or whether it is a pure aesthetic stance, show and shine kind of hard parking style. So without further ado, let's get into it. Now, what is stretch? Stretch is commonly known in the car scene as fitting a narrower tyre onto a larger rim. So what are stretch tyres used for? Stretch tyres are used primarily in drifting and in aesthetic style stance. So there are a whole lot of different in-betweens, but they are the two main areas that you'll find stretch tyres. So drifting and stance. Now, when I say drifting, I'm not limiting it to just drifting. So I'm also talking gymkhana, time attack, hill climbs, circuit racing, and most other forms of competitive motorsport. Now, when it comes to stance, I'm not talking just what looks good. So I'm talking about show cars, auto salons, show and shines, hard parking, display cars, and heavily modified cars. They usually run airbags, even dailies and commuters that have been modified as well with custom suspension to lower or to raise a car. So where did the whole stretch tyre thing originate? Well, here's where it gets interesting. It traces back to around the 70s and it comes from not only Japan, but also from Belgium and Germany. Now in Japan, it's commonly known as Hipari style. In Germany and Belgium, it is known as the Euro look tyre. Now I think this is all over the Euro scene. However, I'm not European, so I can't talk for the Euro guys. You'll have to ask them in the comments. So one of the most commonly asked questions when people refer to stretch is why? Why do you stretch a tyre? Why would you do that? Why would you make a car look like that? Why would you do that to a tyre? Well, to answer that question, you'll have to keep watching this vlog. Why do people stretch tyres? Why is it used? Stretch tyres was most commonly used earlier on, so I'm talking maybe 70s, 80s, 90s, and onwards, 2000s, etc. It was most commonly used in drifting and in daily and commuters, especially in the Euro scene. Now, the reason it was used is because, number one, it is economical. So it is cheaper to run narrow tyres. Now, another reason stretch is used is for the easier loss of traction. Now, you might be sitting there raging at your keyboard wondering, why the hell would you want to lose traction? Oh, they're tyres, I need my traction. This is true. However, there are now principles of motorsport that require the loss of traction, such as drifting and gymkhana. Now, I'm not saying traction isn't important. Traction is very, very important. Still in these motorsports where the loss of traction is a thing. You still need grip and you still need traction to a certain degree and a level to be competitive and to be fast. So, how did stretch tyres start? Well, if we look at how it started in Japan, we need to trace back to the style of it. So the style of stretch tyres in Japan is called Hipari style. Now Hipari style means to stretch a narrow tyre onto a wider rim. Now this is very, very common in drifting. It's common in certain styles of the car scene. So it's also common in certain styles of car modifications, especially Japanese, such as Kyusha, Shakotan, and Bosozoku. Stretch is also quite important when it comes to drifting. However, we'll talk about that in the pros and cons. So then it made its way across from that styling of car and from drifting into dailies and commuters and people that wanted to run that look on their cars all the time. And so they're not just driving their drift cars or their race cars, they wanted to have them on their work cars, their street cars, their dailies. That is the Japanese side of stretch tyres, Hipari style. If we go over to the opposite side of the world, we now have the Euro look tyres. This is what it is called in Belgium and Germany and probably most of the European scene. However, I'm not European, so confirm that with some of your local Euro guys. So the Euro look tyre originated in Germany and Belgium, again in the 80s when people needed to run certain width tyres on their cars. Stretch tyres originated in these countries mainly due to road laws and specifications for their vehicles to be roadworthy. Some countries require that the tread pattern of a tyre is under the body of a vehicle at all times. Now, there's many countries that have to have this. Some countries even have restrictions with the height of the vehicle and how high or how low that vehicle is allowed to be. For example, Australia can't have any car that is under 100mm, which is 10 centimeters off the ground. The lowest point of the car, whether it be structural or aesthetic in certain states, means that it has to be 100mm off. Now, this is pretty monster trucking when it comes to Japanese cars and the look and the style of having a lowered car. The same could be said for Euro cars and the Euro scene, where they like running really nice fitment wheels or really low cars. It is quite hard to do that in some countries due to these laws. So the Euro look tyre started mainly because it was cheaper to run. It was more economical and the average everyday person could afford tyres. So if we take into account the road conditions, the weather conditions and the bit of extremes that Europe has in general, that can dramatically decrease the lifespan of a tyre. So it comes as no surprise that people would want a cheaper alternative to maintaining their vehicles and to have a daily commuter that they're not having to spend a lot of money on. Alright, so here is one of the big questions of the vlog today. You've likely clicked on this video because you're sitting there wondering and asking yourself, are stretch tyres good or are they bad? So before we make up our mind and decide whether stretch is good, bad, aesthetic or functional, let's look at the pros and cons to stretch and why people do it. So if you're just coming across this video or this channel, you may or may not know that my background is primarily in drifting and Japanese cars. However, when I've done up these points, I've made sure that they're pertinent not only to drifting but to racing and to other principles of motorsport and car modifications and styling. So all these points are relevant for the majority of the different fields of cars that we're talking about. Being into drifting, I may elaborate a little bit more on these points for you guys and for people that may not be into drifting, so it is easier to understand. The first pro to running stretch tyres is sharper feedback. Now you might be wondering, what is sharper feedback? What does that mean? Is it suspension? Is it for the car? Is it steering? What? Well, the answer is overall. It feels less sloppy and the car becomes more predictable. Point number 2. Stretch tyres give you a better, more responsive feel to your steering. So what this also means is when it comes to grip, there is no kind of real in-between. There's no, the car's going. It's either got grip or it doesn't. Point number 3 is better handling. Now, a lot of the time, stretch is used on modified or performance cars. So the car naturally has other upgrades that supports these modifications. Point number 4 is less sidewall flex. For instance, having more rigidity and less sidewall flex on a drift car provides smoother and snappier transitions when drifting. Now, point 5 kind of goes hand in hand with point 4. You get less body roll. Now, some people really like body roll, and body roll is relevant and pertinent in, again, certain motorsports. Point 6 in our pros of running stretch tyres. Easier loss of traction. So with an easier loss of traction, you get an improved throttle response. And when it comes to motorsport, an improved throttle response is always a desirable attribute to have with your car. Point number 7. Narrower tyres means cheaper tyres. Cheaper tyres means more drifting. Sorry, I keep going back to the drifting thing. Narrow tyres means that you can run more tyres for cheaper. So if you're an average everyday person and you're not crazy rich, you can still participate in drifting and you can get in all the practice and the seat time that you need to get better. Same with dailies and commuters. You don't have to worry so much about the financial burden of expensive tyres. Now, another big plus with narrow tyres that doesn't only just pertain to drifting but to motorsport in general is less load on the motor. Now what this means is the motor doesn't have to work as hard to spin the tyres, and it's easier for the motor to break traction or to gain traction. Coming from a drifting point of view, less load on your motor is a great thing because drifting is a very hard and harsh sport to use a car for. It is hard on the motors, it is hard on the tyres, and it's hard on the cars and the chassis in general. Some of these cars get pushed to their limit, and it's not uncommon to blow a motor every couple of years with a drift car. So the longer lifespan you can get out of your motor, the better. Now this is our final point in our list of pros on stretch tyres. I think it's probably one of the most important, if not the most important reason that people run stretch. Pro point number 8, clearance. Now by clearance, I don't just mean clearing the guards or clearing the fenders or tucking wheels under the body or the chassis of the car. I'm also talking about having suspension clearance to do with arms and with your steering, and also wiring loom and wheel well clearance. So a lot of motorsports require a car to be lower for better aerodynamics, for better handling, and for a whole menagerie of other reasons. So when you lower a car naturally and you're running bigger wheels, you usually have problems with scrubbing or bottoming out or having the wheels obstructed by the body or the steering components of the vehicle. Now again, you're probably wondering, what am I talking about? Well, check out some of these photos. So this is my 180SX drift car. So this car is set up primarily for drifting. However, it is also a registered vehicle and it is used on the street as a daily. Yes, I go down and get my groceries with this car occasionally. Why? Because I love my car. I love driving race cars everywhere. It is so much fun.
So these are 18 by 10 plus 8. I have smashed my wheel well, but everything else is pretty standard.
Now, when it comes to a lot of cars and a lot of wheels and modifications, people modify their cars to upgrade their car, to make it better for whatever purpose they're building them for, whether it be drifting, racing, handling, anything. With this car in particular, this car has modified suspension and modified steering to allow it to be a better, more effective drift car. Now, by doing this, I've increased my steering and my ability to lock my wheels, which means I can turn more. The final aspect of body clearance that I wanted to touch on as a pro with running stretch tyres on a car is that it allows you the clearance to make full log turns and to not bind or to be... When you increase the steering on your vehicle and you're turning, like this, technically it's like this. So this is called Ackerman. Now, again, I'm sorry that this is going to get a little technical, but Ackerman is the angle of the wheels in comparison to each other, and when you're turning, by how much that angle is. So Ackerman is when the inside wheel, when turning, turns on more of an angle or a degree than the outside wheel. And what you do with drift cars is usually you do something called zero Ackerman, where you take Ackerman completely out of your steering and both wheels turn on the same angle, regardless if they're the inner or the outer wheel. So this point pertains specifically to this and to Ackerman. Sometimes a tyre, especially tyres that don't have stretch and are shaped like this, will bind. The sidewall of the tyre will roll over and it will kind of run on the sidewall and not necessarily the actual tread of the tyre. Sometimes you get a problem where you can't steer the wheel back too easily. It gets stuck. You've got to really reef on it, and you're fighting the car and you're fighting the G-forces of the car and the inertia to try and get that steering back over off the sidewall back onto the tread. Even though this problem is most commonly found in drifting, it also pertains to gymkhana and other motorsports that require a lot of steering. Alright, so that is my list of pros I have for you guys. Now let's get straight into the cons. What are the cons of running stretch on tyres? So, con number 1 when running stretch tyres is you can't see when a tyre goes flat. Now, this is really important because if you get a flat, you want to know about it. Now, this is a problem in a daily, most definitely. 100% definitely a con if you're out in the middle of nowhere or you're driving to your parents' house and you debead a stretch tire or you puncture a stretch tire and you can't tell it's flat. It can then potentially affect the handling of the vehicle and become somewhat of a safety hazard. So con number 2 is if a stretch tire debeads, it is harder to rebead and to reinflate. Now this is 100% true. If you're out in the middle of nowhere or you're driving your race car to your family's house for a Christmas dinner and you debead, you are pretty much in the crap. Unless you have a can of deodorant on you. But if a tire debeads for whatever reason, it is, yes, definitely harder to get it back on the bead and to reinflate it and to keep going. So con number 3 when running stretch tires is that it requires a higher PSI to run stretch tires. Now, when you're running stretch tires, you have to maintain a level of PSI at all times, because if you don't, you can potentially debead the tire off the rim. Another important aspect to running a higher PSI tire is what are you using the vehicle for? Is the vehicle used for motorsport or is the vehicle used as a daily? When running stretch on a daily car, you're not putting that car through the same levels of stress and traction and heat cycling that a race car or a motorsport car would go through. Therefore, the tires don't get as hot and the PSI won't fluctuate anywhere near as much. You could say running stretch on a daily vehicle can be a con because if your tires are not inflated correctly or you don't keep your tires at a safe level of inflation, then you always run the risk of debeading. And con number 4. Now, I've only got 4 cons here. I'm sorry, I did go looking for a whole bunch more cons, but these were the 4 main ones that were most commonly found and I came across a lot. So con number 4 to running stretch tires. Having stretched tires provides a smaller contact patch, therefore less traction and less grip on the road. Now, another important aspect when determining whether this is a con or not is, again, what is the car used for? Is the car a daily or is it modified? Has it already been upgraded? Are the wheels already bigger? Have we already increased the track width and the tyre size of the vehicle already? Or is it a 100% stock OEM daily and we've simply put smaller tyres on OEM rims? Going with the daily option, yes, it is 100% a con to run stretch tyres on OEM rims. Now, that is our list of pros and cons. However, we have other considerations to take into account. Those considerations are, what modifications and what upgrades have you done to your vehicle? Have you naturally increased your tyre size and width for whatever principle of motorsport or application of use that you're using the vehicle for? Is this a modification that you're doing to your car purely for stance or aesthetic or fashionable or trending reasons? Are you running stretch in the case of wheel fitment? What is an owner's personal preference? What is the functional clearance and the height of the vehicle? And finally, when running stretch tyres, you are using tyres in a way that they're not engineered or designed to be used. So a lot of the time, these considerations aren't taken into account when people decide or have an opinion on stretch tyres. So now we've gone over many pros and cons and many considerations when it comes to running stretch tyres on cars. Congratulations! You are now equipped with the knowledge to make an informed decision about whether or not you think stretch is good or bad, functional or aesthetic. You decide. So if you guys want to know more about offset, camber and drifting and a whole bunch of other cool car stuff, please hit that subscribe button, like, comment and let me know what you think about this video and what you'd like to see in future. Thank you guys very much for watching the video and I will see you next time.